Welcome back to Eating America, everybody. This is your boy, the Mad Chef. This is the part of the show where I take you across the country, recreating iconic foods from all 50 states that helped develop our unique food culture as a country. So today we're going to go due north and a little bit west of our last destination. We're going to Illinois, and we're going to be making the very best deep dish Chicago-style pizzas known to man. Now, this item gets a lot of hate, and I'm not really sure why, because the end result's really tasty. Some argue if it's a pizza, if it's a casserole, it's really delicious no matter how you put it. It's an American spin on an Italian classic, and it is a very important part of our food culture because pizza's king here in America. I could have done Italian beef. I did want to, but then every large food influencer on the web has already got a recipe for that, and I wouldn't really be able to do much as far as making a ripple in the pond there. And then now we've got a big obsession with the tavern style, Chicago tavern style pizzas, and I'm not a really big fan of thin crust, but we're going to be bringing some serious love to our Chicago deep dish pizzas. We're going to be making it the best possible. We're doing everything from scratch. So let's get aboard and start cooking. There's a lot of steps to this. It takes a while, but it's worth it. So let's get started. And here's the star of the show, our Chicago-style pizza crust, which is really more like working with butter pastry as opposed to pizza crust, and you'll see why later. But let's go ahead and get started by adding in 2¼ teaspoons or 1 package of instant or rapid rise yeast directly into 1 1/3 of a cup of warm water, not to exceed 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And note that we are not feeding the yeast with any kind of sugar right now because we do not want to speed up the fermentation process right off the bat. All right, we're going to set that aside for about 5 minutes to get foamy, and let's talk about our dry stuff. In this bowl is 3 cups of all-purpose flour, and this next step is going to be a little odd because, well, it is. This is a 1/2 cup of cornmeal. Yes, I said cornmeal. This is white cornmeal, and this is absolutely necessary because the deep dish crust has to have a sturdy, thick texture and stability because we got to use a thicker sauce, and there's a lot of thick ingredients on the bottom, and a regular pizza pie crust is not going to hold up. So after we get all that nice and combined, we're going to go ahead and season this bad boy with 2 teaspoons of table salt or fine sea salt and 1 teaspoon of granulated sugar. And once that's all nice and mixed in, we're going to take this to the bowl of our stand mixer and get this thing put together. It's time to start turning this bad boy out. On a very low mixing speed, we're going to go ahead and start introducing our liquid yeasty boys to our Chicago style crust mixture, starting the hydration process. And guys, do you remember earlier in the video, not that long ago, when I said this was more like a butter pastry than a traditional pizza crust? Or you're about to see the first step of that. After we get all of our nice yeasty juices combined, we're going to add in 1 stick of butter that has been slowly melted. And what I mean by that is we cannot add that in while it is face meltingly hot. So what I did was took that 1 stick of butter and microwaved it in 20 to 30 second intervals until it was just melted and slightly cooled. You don't want to add it in hot because it will kill the yeast. All right, and after all that's been added in, we're going to start coming around with the spatula like I always do, working that dry flour off the sides of the bowl, making sure everything gets well hydrated. And once we see a rough, messy looking dough ball start to form around the hook, we're going to crank this speed up to like a medium-ish speed, and we're going to knead this on a medium high speed for about 5 minutes until a nice, beautiful, smooth, glistening dough ball starts to form. And once we get that nice smooth dough, we're going to give it the little window pane test. As you see here, no light passes through and it doesn't rip. And this is a very silky, smooth dough. Very nice to mess with. It's really more like a fun sort of Play-Doh. Very silky almost. After we're done working with that, we're going to transfer it into a nicely oiled mixing bowl. We're going to cover it up and let it proof for an hour at room temperature. Buckle up, baby. It's about to get weird in here. The 1 hour fermentation is up, and guys, if you are a pizza purist, at this point it's time to cover your eyes and look the other way because this might just make you cry. This might seem bizarre to a lot of you, but this is the only time you're ever going to see me bring out a rolling pin in a pizza dough situation. But this is the way to make a Chicago-style dough. And once we have everything properly floured up, we're going to roll this bad boy out into a rough rectangle approximately 15 inches in width, which is roughly, give or take, the interior width of this cutting board that I'm using. And this is where the butter pastry dough experience really comes in handy. And if you have been watching my channel for a while, then this should look fairly familiar to you, especially if you saw my Christmas special from last year where I made those bear claws. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you do. There'll be a card floating around and a link in the description, and the process that you're witnessing right now is going to be very similar to how we made that butter Danish pastry dough. Once we have everything rolled out into that, rough rectangle, we're going to start spreading around some, well, very poorly softened, unsalted butter. Rookie move, I know. And then we're going to spread it across the entire surface area of our pizza dough. And once it looks something like this, it's time to turn that cutting board on its side and start rolling this thing into a log. Now, guys, this should look super familiar to you. This is how we make cinnamon rolls and honey buns. So technically, if you know how to make cinnamon rolls or honey buns, then you can make a Chicago-style pizza crust. How many times have you heard that in your life? Anyhow, we're going to go about it the same way. We're going to roll this using the typewriter method, going from side to side, trying to very evenly distribute the weight of this dough throughout the entire log. And yes, as you're noticing by now, I also noticed how masculine the ends of my log look. And calm down, ladies. Look at the size of this thing. There's plenty to go around. And once we have a nicely formed log of dough, we're going to cut our phallic pizza dough in half, roll it into a nice tight ball, which this dough is honestly super satisfying to work with. And I hate using that word, but it's super, super fun, and it's super silky and soft, and it basically molds itself to whatever shape you want it to be in with little to zero effort. So once we get a nice smooth ball, we're going to do the same thing with our other piece of pizza dough. We're going to put both of these bad boys back into the same container that we took it out of. We're going to cover it up, put it in the fridge for another hour, and now it's time to work on our sauce. All right, guys, we got to talk about this sauce. Now, at first glance, a couple of these ingredients might look a little out of place to you, much like this tomato paste or this large honkin' sweet onion. But worry not. I'm going to show you guys how to put this all together so you can make the ultimate Chicago-style sauce, starting with how we prep the onion. And all we're going to do is we're going to shred this whole thing on a box grater. Now, I'm using a sweet onion, and in my opinion, that's the move. But you can use a yellow or white onion as well, but you're not going to get that natural sweetness or richness to your sauce. And I do this so I don't have to add as much sugar. And honestly, this is my least favorite part of prep because let's face it, my entire kitchen smells like sweaty ass armpits. And once all that's done, let's get to the stove and make this thing happen. So in a nice sized skillet over medium-high heat, we've got some extra virgin olive oil that's ready to roll. And to that, we're going to add in our whole shredded sweet onion. And if you've been watching me make red sauces like this for a while, you know what's going to happen next. I'm going to give it a nice, generous hit of kosher salt. Not only is that going to provide it with some seasoning, but it's going to allow those onions to cook down over time without browning or over caramelizing. It's going to release all those natural sugars, and then these onions are going to melt directly into the sauce, giving it the body and structure that it desperately needs, because a Chicago style sauce has to be a thick boy. Otherwise, it won't work. That being said, we're going to let these onions cook down for about 9 minutes. And after about 9 minutes, as you can see, a lot of these onions have already started to disappear. They've become flavor. So in the bottom of this pan, we're going to add a little hit of extra virgin olive oil. And then we're going to toss in 1 teaspoon of crushed red chili flakes and 1 tablespoon of minced garlic. And we're going to let that toast off for about 30 seconds to a minute max. Once things become really fragrant, it's time to move on to the next step, which is adding in 1 tablespoon of that tomato paste. And then, like the last time, we're going to let this thing kind of toast off, cook off for about 45 seconds to a minute tops. Once that raw tomato smell kind of goes away, and then your tomato paste starts to fully coat and cover the onions like you see here, it's time to add in that 28-ounce can of San Marzano tomatoes that I've crushed by hand. And we're going to let these tomatoes warm up a little bit. And once they start to bubble like this, it's time to add the seasonings. Now, I did have to amend this recipe to kind of accommodate my wife's sensitive stomach. So we're going to add just a little bit of sugar to play off some of the acidity here. In this bowl is 1 teaspoon of granulated sugar, and that's really all you need. 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper, 1 teaspoon of oregano, and a half a teaspoon of dried basil. We want to get that nice and mixed in. And then we're going to put a lid on this sucker and let it simmer as is for 20 minutes, and that lid is going to let that steam kind of condense into the pan, adding some moisture while it's simmering to make sure that we're not overcooking the sauce and making sure nothing sticks to the bottom of the pan. And after 20 minutes, this is what we have. It passes the clean bottom test. There's nothing stuck to the bottom of the pan. Nothing is burning, and it is super thick. So the only thing to do now is to season it to taste with some kosher salt. Give it a little taste test, and guys, honestly, this is super phenomenal. On a side note here, the original recipe had 2 teaspoons of crushed chili flakes and no sugar, and that's absolutely bomb. But if you have stomach issues or not very good with spice, you can do it this way with only 1 teaspoon of crushed chili flakes and a teaspoon of granulated sugar, and this thing tastes magnificent. So that being said, sauce is done. Let's move back to our crust. This is the part of the pizza making process that'll test your patience and inner gangster like none other. We have to transform this dough into a proper Chicago style crust. But before we can do that, we have to wake up the butter inside the dough, because after an hour in the fridge, it has solidified, making this a little less than ideal to work with. So we're going back into butter pastry mode, and we're going to gently soften the butter inside by going through a series of light taps and gentle rolling. We did this with the bear claws, so we're doing it again because we know it works. And after a few cycles of the taps and gentle rolling, we finally got our dough to where we need it to be to get it to its final form. Now this next step takes a lot of trial and error for me because I'm not good at eyeballing things. We got to roll this dough out into a thin circular disc. Once we drape it over the side of the pan that we're using to cook it in, it should cover half the height of it. We do not want it to exceed half the height standing up, because then your crust will be too thin and it'll fall apart. And after we have appropriately measured out our pizza dough, we're going to go ahead and oil up the inside of the pan we're going to be using. This is just some extra virgin olive oil. Be sure to thoroughly coat the bottom and all the way up the sides to prevent anything from sticking and burning while the pizza's cooking. And after that, we're just going to gently drop in our pizza dough. And guys, this spring form is not meant to be a trigger object for the lovely people of Chicago. I love you guys and your pizza. Sincerely. There's actually a very purposeful reason for me using the spring form, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. Now, once we have dropped our dough into the pan, we have to be very careful to prevent overworking the dough. And also, don't worry about trying to make this dough stretch the entire size of the pan. If you try to work it up the entire wall, it's going to thin out your bottom crust. And that has to be kind of thick and sturdy, because that's where all the heavy stuff goes. A thin bottom crust deep dish is going to collapse as soon as you try to pull a slice out. But we fixed the issue with the dough, although we did kind of rip and lose a little bit of butter. And this is ideally what your crust should look like. Halfway up the pan is all we need, because it will rise like bread and everything will go up like it needs to. And after everything looks like this, it's time to start piling on the toppings. And as we previously mentioned, all the heavy toppings of a Chicago deep dish go right down at the bottom. And so we're going to go ahead and start layering in our nice sliced mozzarella cheese. We want to cover the entire surface area of our pie with this cheese, making sure we leave no gaps. Now, ideally, you want the same amount of provolone, but I did not really think about this in advance, and I didn't quite have enough, but we have enough to add the flavor. You really want equal amounts of both. Now, this is where mine kind of differs from the traditional OG Chicago style. Normally, you would put your meat on top of the cheese, but I don't feel like that gives pizza the balance. You have all this fatty stuff on bottom and then all the sauces on top. You have nothing to balance the acidity. So we're going to go ahead and take half of our thick sauce and put it over the cheese, making sure we leave no gaps. And then we're going to put our pepperonis on top. I know this is not traditional, but the fatty richness and the oils in the pepperoni is going to cut through some of that acidity and some of that tartness in that sauce, and it's going to give it a balance of flavor. And plus, this looks really good. And on top of that, we're going to give it a nice snowing of fresh grated Parmesan Reggiano cheese. Make sure to mist this pan just as much as I did and season your board with the cheese. Now, once we got everything appropriately snowed up, we're going to toss this bad boy in the oven on 425 degrees for about anywhere between 18 and 25 minutes. Now, guys, the reason why I'm using a spring form to make my Chicago style pizzas is because this is only something I'm going to eat maybe once or twice a year. So a spring form does the trick, and it's really not worth it for me to buy like a dedicated deep dish pizza pan. Now, you could use a nice size cast iron. I've seen people do it that way, but this does the job. But to make up for some of the heat transfer issues you're going to have with the springform, I've already got my pizza stone in the oven preheating with it. So that way the pizza stone's nice and hot, and we're going to place the springform on top, which is going to give it a nice toastier, crispier bottom. So I'll see you guys again after everything is all said and done, and I cannot wait to eat this. All right, the 10-minute wait is over, and I really didn't want to have to wait this long because it smells amazing. So here we go. Here we are. We're just going to unlock it and show it all. Rough spots and everything. Ain't that a beauty? I wish I had like a turntable to put it on. That's where the dough started to rip and some of that butter started to leak out. But as you can see, I'm burning my fingers off. This turned out to be a perfect Chicago-style pizza. So now the one gripe that I do have is these things are impossible to cut. You know, with like a regular pizza roller, that would just tear this to shreds. Ideally, what you would need is a pizza rocker. You know, one of those blades on the handle like this that you can just kind of push down and cut across. But I can't find one anywhere near me. So I'm just going to have to use my Damascus steel chef's knife because it's the sharpest one I have, and it's most likely to make a cleaner cut through this pizza. Now, for all of you haters, all of you purists that hate the springform idea, this is ideal. This works. Look. All right, so enough talking. This is a beautiful piece of pizza history here. All right, and the other thing is, unlike other slices of pizza, pretty much one piece of this is a freaking meal because each side weighs like a pound. This is a really hefty pizza. So we always do this with the cheese pull. Let me recut that edge there. Okay. I'm trying to be very careful so I don't mess this up. Oh, yeah. Yep. Y'all see that? That's what it's about. And that's why we also let it rest. Ideally, this should have had a little more provolone, so for a little more pull. And you see what I did with the pizza stone? See how toasty that bottom is? All right. Despite some technical difficulties we had during the process of making this, this is probably the best version of this that I've done. Alright guys, if you like this sort of content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. As always, if there is a destination on this great continent you would like me to go to celebrate the culture of America, please don't forget to write down your requests in the comments telling me where I should go and what I should make. Guys, I do want to make this more about you. I want you guys to control more of this, and it can be more about what you want to see. So don't be shy. I would encourage you to make your requests, but don't be discouraged if it's not going to be featured in the next video. There's a lot of videos lined up for this, but you will be heard. All right, until next time, this is your boy, the Mad Chef. Try this amazing Chicago-style pizza recipe, and I'll see you next week. Actually, no. I will see you in a few days because, as you know, Eating America is a bi-weekly thing for the whole month of July, so every Saturday and Wednesday, you'll be seeing this. So I'll see you again in a few days. Take care.